Yesterday, I introduced your challenge for the week, which is the Is It Worth It challenge. And I got some questions from you that I'm going to answer today. This one will be shorter than yesterday. Well, first I want to answer a question that wasn't totally related to the Is It Worth It challenge so that we can move on from that. One of you asked, my husband wants to keep our leftover Halloween candy in the house. I'm better with out of sight, out of mind. I put it in a bag to hide from me, but I still know it's here. Any suggestions? Okay, a couple things. You first have the practical tools that you can do with the Halloween candy, like put it in a bag and hide it. And then you have the emotional piece that's coming up, which is she's saying, yeah, I put it in a bag to hide it, but I still know it's there. So it's calling to me. What's happening here is that your brain is wired. It has gotten used to this relationship with the candy that it's problematic for you. And so it just knows how to have that problematic relationship. So it knows how to call to you. It knows how to trigger you to eat it. Now, I won't go into it today. This is a combination of the biology of the brain and what happens with the signaling of the brain over time with just the anticipation of candy, but it's also the repeated emotional reaction with candy, right? And so both of those things combined creates an automatic response, right? So candy in the house, I'm going to eat it, right? And that automatic response has been playing on repeat for so long that we don't even really question it. We just think, I'm going to have a problem with this because that's what the brain is used to doing. I talk a lot about the brain, as you know, because that's my favorite thing to study, why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and what that has to do with sort of the biological mechanisms, the brain, and also the mind. And so what's happening is that the brain is used to the pathways, well-worn pathways of candy, I eat it, candy, I eat it. Like I said, it's a combination of what's happening biologically in your past and also emotionally in your past that has just created a worn pathway, a worn neural pathway that says, candy, I eat it, candy, I eat it. And the point of this is that we don't consider disrupting that pathway. We don't actively, intentionally work on disrupting that pathway. And when we don't work on disrupting that pathway, it just does what it knows how to do. Homeostasis, repetitive behavior. I'm just going to take you down that well-worn path because that's what we've always done. I set that stage just to say your best weapon here is to intentionally, actively disrupt the pathway. And the way we disrupt the pathway is to stop getting involved emotionally with the past. So in other words, the more you tell yourself, when I have candy in the house, I can't eat it, or when candy is in the house, it calls to me, or I can't handle myself, or I'm just going to end up eating the whole thing. The more you engage in that pathway, the more it solidifies. And so what I'm asking you to do this week in the Is It Worth It challenge is to get mindful, get up and out of that pathway and ask yourself a different question. So it becomes, instead of where can I hide it so that I won't act out of my old patterns of behavior and eat too much of it, that's engaging with that same pathway, right? Ask yourself a different question. Do I actually want the candy? If so, how much? If so, how will I feel afterwards? Asking yourself a different set of questions to be able to relate to the candy in a different way knocks your brain into a different pathway that says, wait a second, what do you mean, do I want the candy? Of course I want the candy. Well, engage again. Do I actually want the candy? How will I feel after I eat it? Does it make me feel good? How many pieces do I want to make me feel satisfied? Maybe you find when you ask yourself a different question, rather than assume you already know how you're going to behave, that you only want one piece of candy or two pieces of candy. Or maybe you keep eating this type of candy that you don't really like, but it's that one piece that you do really like, right? Asking yourself a different set of questions is going to knock your mind into a different neural pathway that just allows you to open up the space for a new result. Okay. If you keep engaging in the same way of thinking, the same line of questioning, it doesn't allow you to have a different option for a different pathway for a different result. Okay. So to answer her question more specifically, she said her husband wants the candy in the house. She feels like she struggles with it. logistically, can you put it somewhere where it's not in your view, right? So it's not in your face, because that will trigger you to the candy. It will, if it's in your peripheral vision, then it will light up that pathway in the brain that says, oh, I want it. And that's just more uncomfortable. It's just more times where you need to be intentional and mindful about what you do with that pathway, right? So make it easier on yourself and put it away. Now, the emotional piece in her is the one that's saying, yeah, except for if it's in the house, I know it's there and I keep going back for it, right? The emotional piece is the part where we want to engage in a different conversation. Do I really want it? How will it make me feel afterwards? How many pieces do I need to satisfy me? So this is going into your tips and tools for today, which is when you're asking the question of how do I know if it's worth it? My sort of go-to response is, if it costs you your peace and well-being, if it costs you your emotional well-being, for me, it's not worth it. In other words, if you are able to eat a piece of candy, enjoy it, and then move on, that's not costing you your peace and well-being. But if you eat a piece of candy and then it becomes a fight and a battle and a struggle for you not to eat more the rest of the night, is it really worth that piece of candy? And here's the other piece of this that I always want to remind people is that we have these long-standing emotional attachments and truly beliefs and identities around food that we don't ever consider changing, right? So we say something like, well, something like her comment here, which is, I know if I have candy in the house, I'm going to eat it. Well, a different way of saying that is, there was a version of me for whom having candy in the house was very difficult. Who am I now, right? What version of myself do I want to bring to the table? What this does is make this not a foregone conclusion, right? You do have the ability to change your relationship with the candy, but not if you keep engaging in those same messages and beliefs about who you are in relation to the candy, okay? So asking yourself a different line of questions is going to help you dive deeper into who you can become. Now, let me be really clear. Just because I give you the is it worth it challenge on a Monday, it doesn't mean that on a Wednesday, everything's changed and you have a totally different relationship with food. This takes practice. This takes engagement in a different way. And you likely won't get it right the first time or the sixth time or the eighth time. But if you keep engaging in a different conversation around the candy, instead of already assuming you know the answer or the outcome, eventually you will start to shift your relationship with it. So I got my notes over here. I want to make sure I give you all the tools. How do I know if it's worth it? That is going to be individualized for each one of you. For me, if it costs me my peace, it's not worth it. And another quick tidbit on this, you might be at this point saying, well, gosh, I mean, saying no to that also feels bad, right? Like everybody else gets to have it, or, I really like that, and I really want to be able to have some. My argument is truly that emotional connection to the food is just that. It's a learned response. It's a learned emotional connection to the food. And you have the ability to change that. You don't have to believe that you're restricted or deprived just because you say no to something. That is a memorized emotional response. Poor me, why everybody else? Why can't it be this way? That is all a learned emotional response. And as you start to take a different approach to that, I'm more empowered when I say no to these things. It keeps me in my place of peace when I say no to these things. It allows me the opportunity to enjoy the people around me because I'm not now in shame and guilt when I say no to these things. You can start to shift your emotional relationship with food by a different line of questioning and by recognizing that you don't have to feel restricted or deprived every time you say no. That is a diet industry misconception that saying no to something means you're dieting or restricting. Absolutely not. Many, many times saying no to something is because you are actually integrating the part of yourself that wants to feel more emotionally grounded, that wants to feel more empowered, that wants to feel more confident about their food decisions. Okay. Cost you your piece. Okay, I got through those tidbits. So what I want to leave you with as your question for the day, when you asked me, well, how do I know if it's worth it? When I'm asking myself, is it worth it? It's different for everybody. Also, it can change day to day, right? So if you have spent the last 3 days, picking at Halloween candy, and on Friday, it felt worth it to you to have a piece of Halloween candy because you hadn't had something in a while and one felt really good or something like that. And you found yourself picking at it. And now it's Tuesday. That same piece of Halloween candy may not feel worth it anymore. So it can change based on the context and who you've been for the last day, week, month, right? The is it worth it question is fluid. It's always shifting and changing. But just like I mentioned yesterday, the most important piece of it is that you can't put rules and regulations on top of it. You can't say, I'm allowed to have this or I'm not allowed to have this. Because when you put that rule and regulation into place that says, I'm not allowed to or I am allowed to, the brain automatically fires a different part of itself and it will shut off access to the more intuitive part of yourself. So in other words, if the question of sugar comes up and you say, I'm not allowed to have sugar, that automatically shuts down your access to the information of, does sugar feel worth it? Do I actually want some? How many pieces do I want? That kind of thing. When you give yourself a rule right away, it shuts down your access to that information. We have to take the rules away in order to get curious. Okay, let me see if I can check in on some of you on the Facebook page, see if I can find it here, and see if this actually worked with the Facebook page to see if I was going live. Okay, well, I can't see it here. Let me see if I can see it over here. Any questions from you? That's the question I'm trying to get at here, is if you guys have any questions that I can answer. It doesn't look like I can see any questions in the Zoom that I can answer for you about this topic of the figuring out what is worth it and how that changes your relationship to it. Okay, I don't see any questions at the moment. Good. Okay. I think this worked, you guys. I'm going to check this all out after I sign off and see how it worked and see if I was able to get all of the pieces going together. I know that it's recording, so no matter what happens, it's going to show up on your feed today for day 5. And we'll see if this is the answer to all of my woes. Thanks for joining me, you all, today. I'll see you tomorrow, ideally, same time, same place. Bye, everyone.